So for those who are just joining us for the first time this evening online, we are doing a expository teaching of Acts. We are just this evening going to enter Acts 10. And how long has it taken us to get there? A long time. But we will be entering chapter 10. Chapter 10 is a very controversial chapter amongst both Jews and non-Jews. Amongst the Jews, specifically because they want to eat pork and shrimp and lobster and king crabs and queen crabs. Spare ribs. That's part of the pork family, but spare ribs has got its own place, you know. Bacon. And there's a whole big controversy about chapter 10. Is it talking about food? Is it not talking about food? Well, I can begin this part of the teaching by telling you what you don't want to hear. It is not talking about food. It has nothing to do with food. However, as is the case with human beings, we see what we want, we hear what we want, we do what we want, and we justify it. Anybody good at that? So chapter 10 covers the food laws and the question of whether they are still binding. This is not going to be just this evening. So far, I've written 3 messages about this. This is the first one. And it's going to take a little while because it's sort of a complicated issue. It's not as simple as it appears. It takes some understanding. And for those of you who have been watching for a long time, you know that the teaching that I'm doing on Acts, I'm trying very hard to stay in a first century Second Temple understanding of the time period, what was going on, what the people thought, what was standard amongst the people at that time, and so on. Now, the reason, in a nutshell, for the misconstruing of the meaning of this chapter is mostly because of the Christian commentators who are all Gentile and don't have a clue about linking what Judaism was about at that time, nor what an important role halakha, we'll just call it that, and I'll return to that in a minute to review, what it continued to play in the lives of New Testament Jews. It had been that way for at least 2 centuries before Yeshua. Now, we've been using the term halakha. Some people call it halakha. It's not important. We don't say half our words correctly anyway, especially the Greek words. I know one word in Greek really well. Windex. That's the one word I got down pat. What it means, this word, it is the overall body of Jewish laws. And those laws controlled every aspect of Jewish life and Jewish behavior. It consisted then, and it still consists today. It's still going on today. It's a fusion of the Torah of Moses, ancient Jewish customs or traditions, and the rabbinic interpretations of the Hebrew Bible. Now, in the institutional church, you would call it doctrine. Okay? So if you're not from a Jewish background, you would call it doctrine. But within Judaism, it's known as the oral Torah, or as Tevi would say, tradition. So just to do a very quick review, which we don't usually do, because all of this is recorded and online and can be watched at any time, Last time we encountered Peter in chapter 9, he was staying with who that smelled bad? No, not what he did. What was his name? Simon the stinky tanner. He chose on his own to not go and be with royalty or to be with leadership. He chose to be with Simon the tanner. And this is following the miracle, 2 miracles that are referred to at least, of a believer by the name of Aeneas. What happened to Aeneas? He had a stroke. He was paralyzed. Remember? Yeah, there was problems with vision also. But Aeneas was paralyzed. 8 years. And the second miracle was regarding another believer. This time, this was a female believer whose name was Dorcas, Tabitha, depends upon which Bible you're reading. She was well loved, respected, and died suddenly. Now notice that one of them was male and one of them was female. And as big of a miracle as it is for the Lord to restore movement to a paralyzed man, I would say that's a pretty startling miracle. That bringing someone back to life trumps that one. And in an era or a time or a culture of male domination, I think God was trying to make a point, specifically in this area of the Bible where he's talking about things, that he values men the same as he values women. And he does a few different things like this. So I've asked Donna, where is Donna? Hello, Donna. Say again? Yeah, well, if you get out of your assigned seat, forget it, Jack. I have no idea where anybody is. You guys are good. You're in the right place. Yeah, absolutely. All right, you have the mic? All right, let's get the words up on the screen, and if you would follow along with her.
Now in Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian cohort. He was a devout man, revering God with all his household. He gave tzedakah generously to the people and prayed to God continually. About the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming and saying to him, "Cornelius." He stared at him in terror and said, "What is it, Lord?" The angel said to him, "Your prayers and tzedakah have gone up as a memorial offering before God. Now send men to Joppa and call for Simon, also named Peter. He is being entertained as a guest by Simon the tanner, whose house is beside the sea." When the angel speaking to him had left, he called 2 of his servants and a soldier from among those attached to his command. After he explained everything to them, he sent them to Joppa. Peter's vision the next day, as the soldiers were traveling and approaching the city, Peter went up to the rooftop to pray at about the 6th hour. Now he became very hungry and wanted to eat, but while they were preparing something, he fell into a trance. He saw the heavens opened and something like a great sheet coming down, lowered by its 4 corners to the earth. In it were all sorts of 4-footed animals and reptiles and birds of the air. A voice came to him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "Certainly not, Lord, for never have I eaten anything unholy or unclean." Again a voice came to him a second time, "What God has made clean, you must not consider unholy." This happened 3 times, and the sheet was immediately taken up to heaven.
Thank you, Donna. So what we're witnessing here is a sea change in the history of the Bible. I say that because the Gentiles are suddenly no longer pictured just as opponents of the Jews. That's how they're seen up to this point in the Bible. But suddenly they're a target of God's mercy. Wow. Target of God's mercy. He wants them fully included in his kingdom that's ruled by a Jewish Messiah and King, whose name is Yeshua. And then comes, as the story unravels, a Roman centurion named Cornelius. Why is he called a centurion? Does anybody know? He's over 100 men. So he's not a slouch. He's paid about 10 times what the average soldier is paid. And he enters the story as he has been shown, as it's shown in the story, he opened his heart to the God of Israel. So this is the people that were oppressing Israel, opening their heart to them. So if you were to hear a Jew, let me say that differently. If you were Jewish and you heard what Peter did in going to Cornelius, you may have been pretty astounded. It's like you might even been angry. You probably would be angrier than the Jews were when they found out that the believers were reaching out to the half-breed Samaritans. You understand the times we're in. It would be sort of like, bringing it more current, be sort of like what other Jews in the Nazi concentration camps would have said and felt if one of the Jewish people went to one of their oppressive guards and started sharing with him about the righteousness that he could have if he would become part of the community of God. If he would just trust the God of the Jews. So I'm just trying to put things in a little bit of perspective. Remember, Cornelius is given a glowing, outstanding portrayal. First thing that he's described as is devout. What does devout mean in this context? That he was faithful to God. Absolutely. And he also clearly led his family in this same way. Second, he feared God. What does it mean to fear God? Revere God. Does it mean to fear him literally? Sometimes. You better. To be in awe of, to revere him. Third, he was a giver of alms or charity, tzedakah. He was a giver. And fourth, he continuously prayed to God. Now, one of the things that I don't think we probably think about is that Cornelius was not hiding his devotion to the Jewish God. That's a little strange, right? You're over these people, you're oppressing them. Maybe he wasn't personally, but yes, he was in effect, because he was over 100 men who had a job to do. And that was keep the peace and hold them down. Yet he wasn't hiding it. Maybe it's because we don't know that Rome was very tolerant, completely tolerant of all the religions in the empire. So Caesar worship and full loyalty, without any question, to the Roman government was expected and was paramount, but the soldiers could worship any god they wanted, including the God of the Jews. Full permission. Verse 3 says it was the 9th hour, which is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The reason we say that, it's 3 in the afternoon. It was the standard Jewish prayer time when afternoon sacrifices at the temple would occur in Jerusalem. And the vision was an angel who spoke to him. So we have a vision. He's in a trance. He's not dreaming and he's not asleep. So what's happening here, if we put this in context, is that before Peter gets the divine message, the revelation, whatever you want to call it, that the barriers between the Jews and the Gentiles are falling as per God, Cornelius is given this hint. If you think about it, he's sort of told first that a relationship with God that had previously been reserved only for the Jews was now offered to the Gentiles. So when I say this is a sea change, this is not a minor change in the scripture. This is a big deal. But Peter, in the midst of this, has a very unsettling, to say the least, and corresponding vision to Cornelius's. And it's been unsettling to much of the church ever since this vision was written down and recorded for us. We're going to skip to verse 10. And I don't know how super important this is, but we're going to explore this a little bit more in the next couple weeks. One of the most overlooked passages in this chapter, it says that while Peter was up there, he was hungry. Now, when you're hungry, what do you think about? Food. And when you're really hungry, what do you think about? Ice cream. Charlie, just so you know, I have a fixation on ice cream. So everything's about ice cream up here, and I'm not allowed to eat it, so it's even worse. So while he's on the roof, fixated on food, he goes into what the Greek says, here I go, crucifying the Greek words, ecstasis. He goes into ecstasis. Most English Bibles translate that word into trance. It's probably an acceptable meaning, provided that we understand that this trance is God-induced. Okay? It's a God-induced condition where the person is transported, is the best word I can use, beyond his normal physical state. But to that person is perceiving it as it's the real world going on at that time. And he's using his own normal senses of sight and hearing and smell and so on. So it's very real to him. Peter sees heaven open, and descending from heaven is a cloth. Now, there's a whole lot of people that talk about this cloth as being a talit. I'd like you to do some homework on that to realize why that's probably not true, but I'm not going to get into that tonight. This is a four-cornered rectangular piece of cloth that's descending from heaven. And again, we have to keep this in mind. In this ecstatic state that he's in, this state is influenced by God. So this is not just something that's coming out of nowhere. This is something that's happening in the world that God wants to bring forward. He's in a spiritual trance, and again, he's not having a dream. And Peter's vision is puzzling to him. Why do you think it's puzzling? Remember, he's thinking about food. Say it again. Because of his traditions. It's like, wait a minute, the Lord's telling me to eat stuff I'm not supposed to eat. So it's puzzling to him. In Hebrew thought, remember this is a four-cornered cloth. The number 4 represents the world, and it's 4 compass points, just so you understand. So the four-cornered cloth, again, represents the whole world. And in this cloth, there's an assortment of 4 kinds of not 4 kinds. There's multiple kinds of 4-legged animals. There's no vegetables. Hint, hint. French fries. French fries are vegetables. Ask any child and they will tell you. Well, we know they're not vegetables, but I'm up here and you're not. All right. So we've got these 4-legged animals, we've got crawling creatures, and we've got wild birds. All crawling creatures and most wild birds are not permissible for food, and yet he's being told to eat it. We don't know anything more about these animals than what you read about what I just basically just said. He's just told to kill the animals and eat them, which is revolting to Peter. Revolting. Because he's never eaten food like this, and he won't eat food like this. We haven't gotten there yet. For those of you watching online, what was just called out was, it's not food. We haven't gotten there yet. It says that he had never eaten food of this kind. And what was this kind? Well, the passage says in Greek that it was, I might get this one right, koinos, and the other is akathetos. That sounds like a catheter, right? You know, we wouldn't eat that, right? God knows what it's supposed to be. But in Judaism, we have a really simple word, treif. Okay? Where do you find treif that's acceptable in Judaism? Come on, you all know the answer. Chinese restaurants. It must be. My parents let us go there. Charlie, did you grow up that way? I mean, that's where the kosher treif is. That's an oxymoron if I ever said one. Koinos means common. Part of the reason this is difficult and will become a little confusing, and I hope by the end I can get it out that you'll understand it over the next couple weeks, is that we don't think of things today the way that they were perceived or meant then. So koinos means common, and akthartos, I'll just say that, means unclean. Common means something that is not holy. Common means something that's not holy. Unclean means something that is ritually impure. Common and unclean are completely separate issues and are treated completely different by God's dietary laws. However, in reality, what we see is Peter making a response directly to God in his trance that's most likely a combination of him blurting out in his own words God's Torah law and citing traditions. I mean, he's flat out telling God, no, I'm not eating this stuff. Now, it's real easy for us to say, Well, God told him not to eat it, so he's telling God not to. But if God's telling you to do something, maybe, I don't know. A little confusing, right? Well, we know Peter. He had no confusion jumping out of the boat. Mr. Impulsive, my best friend, jumps right out of the boat. Peter hears, kill these animals that are unclean and eat them, and he just immediately goes, no, not doing it. So he's got a disconnect in his mind. And there's a disconnect between the terms that Peter uses, so here's the beginning of the confusion, and the kosher status of the animals that are being offered to him as food. Let me say it another way. The issue facing Peter is primarily about halakha, or oral traditions. He's dealing with the oral traditions, and God is God. Now stay with me, because we're just beginning to get into this exploration. And believe me, we would be going all night if I kept going. It's an interesting study. It's different, believe me, I'm sure it'll be different than what you'll expect. So stay with me as I close with this evening. The Torah of Moses shows that all objects, including people, are in God's eyes in one of three categories. They're either holy, common, or unclean. Holy means set apart for God. I think we all know that. Common means things that are not set apart for God. But it doesn't in any way mean that common things are evil or wrong. I'll give you a second to digest this. Doesn't mean the common things are evil or wrong. It just means that they're not given this special status of holy. And unclean speaks of things that would otherwise be acceptable to God, but for a number of reasons are now in a state of ritual impurity. So unclean doesn't mean they started out bad. Something happened, I won't get into detail right now, and they became ritually impure. And in this state of uncleanliness, they cannot be used in service to God. For a Gentile Christian especially, unholy represents in that person's mind a mental picture of something wicked or something bad, something that is opposed to God. But common doesn't mean wicked. And so as we think of the term in common in our day, it also doesn't mean unholy. I know you're probably as confused as I am and was as I continue on with this next week. But I do want to say that Peter's response to God's instruction to kill and eat is also somewhat mysterious. When it comes to describing whether edible items, food, are God-authorized foods for Jews, in other words, kosher, then the issue is whether that food is categorized as permissible or prohibited. Is that straightforward enough? I think we have that one. It is prohibited then. If it is prohibited, then it is not food. Simple as that. So let's use an example. When the waitress at Red Lobster brings you your lobster, you're supposed to say, I ordered food. And the waitress will look at you like you're an idiot. But that's the way God sees it. It's not food. We will get into this. It's a shame. Not long ago, Jackie and I were out with some friends, Messianic Jewish friends, with a Jewish upbringing. And it was the first time that one of the couples had been together in the group. And I needed to say to them, listen, I know I'm the rabbi, and I know we're in a place where you can get treif, and I know that you are probably not comfortable about what you're going to eat, but you can eat whatever you want. It's not between me and you, it's between you and God. And immediately that person, to defend themselves, started to cite all the scriptures, including this one, about, I don't know why you say it's not kosher. I don't know why you say that. We're allowed to eat whatever we want now. Unfortunately, that person isn't here, but that person can watch us online. And if they are watching us right now online, they're probably thinking, wait till you get home. Wait till he gets home. I know what time he gets home, and I know his private number. We're going to get into this tonight. Do not disturb. If it's prohibited, then it is not food. Ever. Ever. If it's permissible, then it is food. Forever. Are French fries permissible? They are food. Say yes, dear. Waffle fries. We're in the very beginning. It's going to take us, like I said, at least another 2, maybe 3 weeks to get through this. And I hope that it will be less confusing as we go along, but it gets a lot deeper, so it's going to be a little hard. You might need to watch this more than one time online, because next week we are going to get into the ready for this? Meat of things.